In this video, I'm going to teach you my exact method on how to understand fast Spanish. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid. I'm 16 years old and I became a polyglot at 13 years old after getting conversationally fluent in Spanish after the summer of 2022. Here's my before and after.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español. Y ahora puedo hablar de más o menos muchas cosas, pero hay un límite.
El meme es un pescado
Sí.
debajo del agua
Sí.
y hay un video, ¿sí lo has visto?
No lo he visto, pero explícame.
Ok, es un pescado debajo del agua
Sí.
y el pescado mira la cámara y en vez de decir glu glu glu.
So like I said, I became fluent in Spanish after the summer of 2022 and not just fluent, but conversationally fluent. Before then, I was doing tons of research on different ways to learn Spanish. And eventually I'd found a sort of general plan, which was to have a speaking exercise and a listening exercise. And prior to then, I had already been studying grammar for about 3 months or so, and I had put in around about 30 hours of Spanish to just studying grammar through a course called the language transfer course. And so the summer was just basically two aspects of the language that I focused on, which was speaking ability and listening ability. Now in this video, I'm going to introduce the Spanish versus real Spanish concept, which is crucial to understanding fast Spanish, because this video right here is made for you watching this who is able to sort of speak Spanish, but the main sort of constraint in your language learning and your ability to get fluent and be able to speak Spanish is understanding fast Spanish. You probably know this, and this is pretty common where people will be able to understand like Spanish. Like if I started speaking slow Spanish, or you watch like these videos from like Dreaming Spanish, or you know the basic sort of, you know, the main method of learning Spanish, right? The teacher speaks very slowly, they really pronounce every single word. You probably understand that, even if you barely have been studying Spanish at all. What you really struggle with is getting into conversation. So in this video, I'm going to introduce firstly Spanish versus real Spanish, which is really going to help you with this idea. And then exactly what to do to be able to understand and learn fast Spanish. So most learners learn Spanish the conventional way of memorizing ABCs, flashcards, and Duolingo. And this is actually the main reason most people never succeed. You know, I made a video a while back, right? It was about why I basically called this app or like this website or YouTube channel called Dreaming Spanish. I basically said it was BS, that it didn't work. Or that, not that it didn't work, but that it had some problematic elements to them. And this is one of the main arguments or reasons that I made for that, okay? So firstly, the people who got fluent with Dreaming Spanish, like there was a person that commented, I checked out their channel and they've been studying over 600 hours on Dreaming Spanish, and their Spanish like wasn't even that good. And I've studied less than 200 hours now, and like not to say my Spanish is perfect, but I'm able to obviously have fluent conversations. And some natives have even told me that I sound native myself, which I don't think I am at that level yet, but definitely made some great progress in there. And I've studied less than 200 hours total. So I've done a third of the effort and probably gotten double the results, which should tell you a lot about the method of learning. And one of those main parts was understanding fast Spanish, which, by the way, even now, I don't understand every single word of fast Spanish. And we're going to get into exactly why that is. So most people, firstly, they don't even understand this concept of Spanish versus real Spanish. And it pisses me off because we waste so much time on methods that just don't work, and they waste our time. Not to say they don't work, like Duolingo can work, right? But you have to spend thousands of hours on it, and you don't get that good of a result either. And so it's all based on this one concept and this one idea that you already know, and which is that real world Spanish is different to what school has been teaching us and what all the other methods like on Duolingo and on these YouTube channels where the teacher is speaking slowly and explaining something like, hola, me llamo Juan, me gusta hablar español. That's not how Spanish sounds like. We all know that. And so how does Spanish actually speak, right? This is a question you probably need to ask yourself if you want to be able to understand fast Spanish. You know, you want to understand natives. So this is probably an important question. How do real natives actually speak? Do they say, firstly, let's start at the base level. Do they say, hola, yo hablo español? No, they don't speak. They firstly have an accent, right? A Spanish accent. But also, they would probably say, hola, hablo español, right? And so, in fact, this difference is even bigger than just that. So let me give you two examples now. So let's take the sentence or some words, right? Some normal sort of Spanish things, right? Aquí estoy. Escúchame. Es que hay muchos problemas. A native, and I'm not making this up, a native would say, aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay mucho problema. Right? And it's interesting. I went to Sevilla with my class, and as I was doing a little research on the accent, because I wanted to sort of understand some colloquial sayings they would say. So their way of saying like bro or like brother or something like that is like tío, which is a Spanish word for uncle. And so when I was doing the exercise, which I'm going to teach you in this video on how to understand fast Spanish, I also discovered where basically this girl came and said like, here I am, right? She said, acá estoy. The word for here is acá or aquí, and estoy is I am. Acá estoy. What she said though, like that was what the word, the subtitle said. What she actually said was acá estoy. Acá estoy. And so this is how natives speak. We all know that natives don't actually speak the way we think they speak. The main differences are that real Spanish, first they have the vowels, which we all know. They speak with a Spanish accent, right? But the main part, and this is the sauce of this video, this is the part where most people mess up on, is that they speak faster and they drop letters and combine words. They put words together. They don't just like go word for word. And then obviously there's letters and characters that are pronounced differently, and that makes a minute difference. And then also Spanish tone and accent. So Colombians would probably use different words and a different tone than an Argentinian or a Spanish person like from Spain. And this applies for any language. This isn't some like annoying thing in Spanish. It's just how languages work by definition. Imagine your native language is English, right? Were you surrounded by English or real English? Right? Let's take the Spanish concept, the Spanish versus real Spanish concept, and let's just put it to English. And this is not to offend anyone, but you don't say, I am wanting to learn English because I am very liking English with like a very Indian sort of accent. You don't speak like that for a reason, because that isn't how your parents / your environment spoke. And so if someone was to learn English to go to the US, like if someone was trying to learn English to go to the US, would it make sense to study the Indian accent or the American accent? Obviously the American accent. Imagine they studied the Indian accent. Think about how much harder it would be to understand the American accent, because they're used to pronouncing words in this way and speaking this way and speaking with this tempo and speed, when the actual thing they wanted to go to, or the country they wanted to go to and the thing they wanted to learn didn't emulate that. So it makes no sense for us to study non-native accent / speech, because we don't want to learn it. You probably don't care. Like, you're watching this video right now. You're the person watching this video, the obsessed Spanish learner who wants to reach fluency as fast as possible, which is what I'm making all this content for. You and me, we don't care about that. We actually care about making real progress. And by the way, if you are interested in making real progress, just check the description. I can help you achieve that even faster. And so when learning Spanish, we are going to learn real Spanish. IRL Spanish, not hola, me llamo Juan. No, that's not Spanish. We want to suck out, like extract this idea of like, hola, me llamo Juan. Yo he estado hablando español por mucho tiempo. That way of speaking. And this is what I got tons of hate for on like these dreamy Spanish like fanboys, or you know what I mean, right? Because their method is to study slow Spanish and then study fast Spanish. The idea here is you don't understand fast Spanish because you haven't been studying it. You know, it's simple. If you want to get stronger biceps, right? Would you A, do lateral raises, or B, do bicep curls or chin-ups or something? You probably would choose the latter option, right? Because it just makes more sense. Of course, if you wanted to get stronger biceps, you would train your biceps. So why don't we use that same idea when training our Spanish, when training our mind? And it just blows my mind. It's such a simple concept, but it seems that people don't implement it, which is why most people don't achieve the same result as someone who did implement it, from me or other one of my clients who have experienced the same benefits. And so the number one reason why you can't understand fast Spanish, and the tip to implement now, is to stop listening and consuming slow Spanish. And also not only that, right? But also what even the goal is. And this is going to go to our next point, which is the fluency equation. So I remember I was studying grammar on the way, like I was on the metro station on the way to school, because I live 30-40 minutes away from school with using the train. And I just sort of thought about it as I was, studying the grammar. I just realized, like, yeah, most Spanish sentences are just built up of two things, aren't they? And then I thought about it even more, and later I basically created this framework or this equation, which just explains that what fluency is, what the goal is. And so this is the perfect one. So from the YouTube I've seen, the definition of fluency was just to have fluidity when you speak. But you're watching this right now, we don't really agree with that, because our goal is to be able to have conversations and connect with natives. So it doesn't necessarily matter if we can, understand perfect Spanish or read perfect Spanish or be able to write the perfect professional formal letter in Spanish. No, we just want to be able to construct sentences and have that back and forth. The flow doesn't have to be in the conversation because that's our goal. It's conversational fluency. And so instead of defining fluency as this, being able to speak effortlessly and articulately, which is the goal, of course, we want to eventually reach that point, it's not accurate in relation to what most people think fluency is, because for you and me, fluency is just be able to connect with people. It is to have conversations with people and have this back and forth. And so the goal is always going to be conversational fluency, where the flow and the fluidity is in the conversation, not necessarily only in your speech. And so putting the fluency into a formula/equation, which would apply for both conversational and native, would be this exact formula. And this is just straight gold for you. It is speaking multiplied by understanding. That is what fluency is, because we've defined fluency as conversational fluency. And so a conversation is just two skills. It's speaking and understanding. And when we say understanding, we're talking about understanding audible sound. So again, another reason why you may not understand fast Spanish and that the constraint for you is probably that you're not even practicing audible Spanish. You've been practicing the speaking ability, which is to speak words. But when you're trying to understand Spanish, are you consuming it through audible input or are you consuming it through reading, writing, slow Spanish, basically? The beautiful thing actually with native Spanish is that there's no escape. There's no way to there's an escape, but there's no sort of easy way to get out of it. Do you get it? It's like a pure test, you know what I mean? When you're listening to slow Spanish, it's like you barely need to even listen. You know what they're talking about because they're so clear in every word that they say. When you listen to native Spanish, it is like an ongoing test. You're in your head like, wait, what is he saying? What is he saying? And that challenges you. And fundamentally, you get stronger when you challenge yourself. The guy who progressively overloads in the gym and adds more weight will build more muscle than the guy who stays at the same weight. Do you think the guy who overloads himself with more weight will get stronger than the guy who doesn't? Of course he will, because he's putting more weight. He's challenging himself more. And so this idea of starting slow and then going up, it's just stupid because you're there to train. You're there to challenge yourself. So why do the easy stuff? Imagine going into a gym and saying, let me do 2 bicep curls, then 4, then 6, then 10. It's like, what are you talking about, dude? Just do 10 reps and then you're done. Why do you have to didn't mean it's just basic facts. Hopefully you understand these analogies of the gym and stuff. So another constraint that you may have is this, that you're not listening to audible Spanish. When you're studying Spanish, that you're not implementing both speaking and understanding. This is why the whole medium of how I teach Spanish is always these two mediums. You will never find me teaching someone Spanish through a book. I give them a book and then they have to read the book. Of course not, because is that how I learned Spanish, firstly? Hell no. I didn't learn Spanish like that. I implemented speaking and understanding. I got fluent faster than everyone else. I'm not saying that to sound arrogant. I'm saying that because it's the truth. And so you're watching this video. You want to be able to understand fast Spanish. You need to firstly listen to Spanish, and not slow Spanish, but fast Spanish. That's it. And so what this looks like is understanding real Spanish. So listening to real Spanish, where in the sentences, there are going to be grammar and vocab. And grammar and vocab is basically what I said before, the thing I realized on the train, basically, where I realized that Spanish is literally just built up of grammar and vocab. And so now I want to introduce you to the concept of Lur and Sur ladders, which just represent the fluency equation. So how do we improve the skills of speaking and understanding spoken Spanish? By speaking and understanding spoken Spanish. You're watching this right now. Your struggle is to understand fast Spanish. So what we'll be doing is we will be understanding spoken Spanish. That's our goal. And so you get better at understanding Spanish by understanding more Spanish, right? Your ability to understand and comprehend fast Spanish gets better when you comprehend and understand fast Spanish. So what this looks like as an exercise is what I call the Lur ladder, which is first step is to listen to spoken Spanish, of course. And when we say spoken Spanish, we're talking about real Spanish, of course. And then you want to understand the spoken Spanish. So you're watching this video because you don't understand the fast spoken Spanish. We're going to understand the fast spoken Spanish by using, a translator. We'll get to that step later on, right? And then it's just repeating those 2 steps because by definition, humans learn by repetition. If you don't repeat, then both the previous steps are just useless. And so this is what they look like visually. And the Sur ladder was kind of what I went through in my last video, where I went through how to get better at speaking Spanish. And so the more you climb, the better your Spanish will get. And that is just the fact of the universe. Anytime anyone ever got fluent was through climbing these 2 ladders. Anyone that ever tells you otherwise is an absolute liar, because there's no way to have a conversation in Spanish if you can't understand audible Spanish and you can't speak spoken Spanish. You can't speak Spanish. And so anyone ever got fluent climbed these 2 ladders. They had repeated these 3 steps, or technically 2 steps, because the 3rd step is to repeat over and over again for both ladders. And that is exactly how fluency even looks, as like an equation or like a ladder. So now for what you watching this video, what is the exercise that I would recommend to you to climb the LER ladder? So to get better at understanding spoken Spanish, we have to listen to spoken Spanish, understand spoken Spanish, and repeat. But there are millions of ways to climb the LER ladder, and this is where you see these discrepancies online. Many people give you different ways of understanding spoken Spanish and getting better at understanding fast Spanish. And obviously, because there are many ways to listen to spoken Spanish, understand spoken Spanish, and repeat those 2 steps, there are millions of ways to do that. But most of those ways have some BS in between, and like, you know, there's some like garbage in between the gold, if that's a way to describe it, right? To clean out the garbage, this is at least how I like to do it, because this is the method that I use, and I used during the summer of 2022 to get conversation fluent in Spanish in the time that I did. And I call it transcript training, and it is inspired from what I saw from one of the YouTubers that I watched to get fluent. And his name was Language Lords, and he did basically a very similar exercise where he studied real native Spanish and he used basically their transcript. So I took that, so I sort of did that exercise and I made it my own style. I didn't really do it in the exact way that he did it. And so this is the exercise I like to call transcript training. I'm going to teach it to you, and this is going to help you to understand fast Spanish. And in the end of this video, I'm going to give you the way to absolutely double, triple X this exercise and make it so much more valuable. Just real quick, if you aren't doing this video so far, just comment and say like, hey, this is a good video, I enjoyed it. That will motivate me to make more of these sort of presentation style videos, because usually I don't make these presentation style videos because they're really long. They take a lot of time for me to make and a lot of effort. Just comment in the below like, hey, yeah, this presentation style is good or it's not good, and you want to critique me. I'm open to that critique. Let's move on. So the first step is to listen, of course, right? Now, the way I like to listen is by picking out native content, obviously, real Spanish, that has accurate subtitles / transcripts, which also, you know, hence the name transcript training. And the reason why is because we want to be able to pick out the words, because you need to be able to pick out the words to understand them. And so when they have accurate subtitles and transcripts, you will be able to do that. And there are obviously many ways to find out if they have accurate subtitles or transcripts. Best way, you can find out, just watch the video and see, do the words match the things that are saying? And you can see which ones are automatic or not. The next step is to understand, right? So L-U-R, so L is for listening. Next step is to understand. Now, in order to understand the vocabulary and the grammar that we're seeing in this, that we're hearing, what I like to do is I just like to translate using DeepL, which is a really good translator for, you know, learning languages, because it has many alternatives. And when I say translate it, I mean focusing on word for word translations in order to fully understand the sentence. And then moreover, to understand the grammar, I simply identify every verb and put it into SpanishLick.com. And then I quiz myself on every conjugation to learn the irregularities. So Spanish basically has tons of verbs, and the verbs have many irregularities and conjugations. To understand the grammar, it's as simply as to identify the verbs, put them into this website called SpanishDictionary.com, where it basically has the whole table of all the different tenses, and just quiz myself on all of them to see that I actually know every tense, and I can take the vocabulary and then take the grammar and then basically make any sentence I want based on that grammar and vocabulary. And this will get you, the reason why this is so good is because this will get you to learn words, learn vocabulary from natives. I'll have to yell on the microphone for that. Because when you learn through like Anki and Quizlet text, that is not a native speaking. The word that is being said or read by you isn't the same word that the native will say, which is why you've been struggling with fast Spanish for so long. When you watch native content, you will learn this native vocabulary, obviously after you translate it. You will learn it the way that it is actually said, not in the way that you're reading it, because you aren't a native. A native will not say, estoy hablando español. A native will say, estoy hablando español. And so we need to, again, study what the natives are doing, study how natives are speaking. And so the reason why this exercise and the way I like to do it is so good is because you will learn the word estoy exactly how it's said, which is toy. Even though it's stupid, because some people say estoy and some people say toy. People say it like that. And so instead of complaining and sitting here and being like, oh no, why did they speak like that? Why did they put the words together? It's like, firstly, you do it in English, so you can't be saying anything. But also, like, why complain and sit there and hate a 16-year-old's method on the internet that actually works, instead of just taking the advice and actually implementing it and seeing the benefit. And the last step is to just repeat. So once I've understood the sentence, I go back to before the sentence was said, so in the piece of content, right? And I just listen to it again to see if I understand it now. This process of repetition is the most important step, and it is an extremely long process. The goal is to repeat everything until you've fully understood everything. Repetition is key. Repetition is the main part of language. You get better by reps. Imagine you just did one set of chest like once a week. You probably wouldn't gain much in your chest, at least. So you need to do a good amount of repetition. And this is just the basic part. Language learning and learning anything requires repetition. And this is a key part. Quality is better than quantity. So if you did this transcript training method, like very little, it would honestly beat the hours of scrolling on Anki. But quality quantity always wins. I'll say that again. Quality quantity, so lots of quality, is better than anything else. Because quality by itself, good. Quantity by itself, sure, good. When you put them together, then you actually have a machine that's working for you. And so this process takes a long time in the beginning, and it took me over 30 minutes to get past only 2 minutes of Spanish content, and I forgot most of it the next day, which is why consistency is key, which is why I needed to repeat over and over again. Now, one last thing I want to teach, and this is actually in my program where I teach Spanish, and I'm going to give you a tiny snippet of it now just because it will give you such a big benefit. If you're interested, by the way, in the program, just check the description. And that is what I like to call advanced transcript training, which is where not only do you use native content, but, and this is the key, I want you to really listen here, you speed up the content. That's right. You take the already fast Spanish, which you are struggling to understand now, and you speed it up to 1.25, 1.5, 1.75, and eventually 2 times the speed. If you can understand every single verb and every single word in a piece of Spanish content at 1.5 to 2 times the speed, I guarantee you will be able to understand natives when they speak. And the reason why I'm so confident is actually because of making these videos. So when I make these videos and I edit them, and now I actually have an editor, but before when I used to make these videos myself and I was going through these videos, what I would do is, because there's tons of yapping in these videos, I would speed up the videos. Okay, so I would speed them up to 1.5, 1.275, the speed. So just so that it would take, less time to edit, right? And you know what's crazy, right? After I would edit these videos at 1.75 speed, like much faster than it was actually recorded in, when I would go back to the original speed, it felt like I was speaking in slow motion. And this is because of something called relativity. So relativity is this concept of, it's all relative, right? So you right now, if you live in a very rich neighborhood, you have a roof over your head, 4 walls around you, and a door. You have a room. You have your own personal room. A kid in Africa who is starving and very poor and, is struggling with finances and like all that, right? He would be so much more grateful than you are right now for the room around you, right? Which is also a sign to be grateful. But the reason why is because it's all relative. Because let's take the other example, right? The guy who never ever has had a room in his life, well, he'd be so grateful for the room that you and me live in every day and haven't even said that we're thankful for, right? It's all relative. What is normal for you is relative to what is normal for someone else. It's all relative. What is normal for you might not be normal for other people. Using this concept in Spanish is such a good way to just understand fast Spanish, because when you make, when I edit these videos, when I make the norm, what it feels normal to me, extremely fast, well then, now that fast is equal to normal is actually equal to slow. And so when you're studying Spanish, if your normal became sped up native Spanish, so 2x Spanish, faster Spanish than native Spanish, well then native Spanish is actually going to feel like slow motion. Even though right now you listen to natives and you're like, what the hell did he say? When you do transcript training and you do what I call advanced transcript training, the benefit is actually outrageous, because the norm will become the fast. And then you'll watch these natives speak, and you'll be like, why is he speaking so slowly? Because you've gotten used to the advanced transcript training, which is why it's advanced, because it's the highest level in my opinion. Now, as a practical tip for you to implement this, I got fluent in Spanish, conversationally fluent in Spanish, after around about 1 to 3 hours of native Spanish content. When I've understood 1 to 3 hours of native Spanish content, that is when I was able to clearly communicate with natives. And that's because most Spanish words are just there's a most common 1,000, 2,000 words in Spanish that are used so much over and over again that when you study 1 hour to 3 hours of Spanish content using transcript training, the amount of vocab you get is like maybe 10,000 words, and like 80% of those words are just repeated verbs and words. So that's why you get the vocabulary that natives use. And also you get the vocabulary that natives pronounce in. Natives don't pronounce words the way they're written. They pronounce it differently. Just like how you and me in English, we say "ama" instead of "I am going to." No one says "I am going to." We say "ama." We say "I'm finna" in slang, right? So slang and all these things, we want to study it to understand it. Simple concept. And that is what this is based on. And so as you can see, transcript training, the Learn Ladder, is just a small part of a whole process of how I teach Spanish and how I got fluent in Spanish myself. Finally, if you want to actually implement these frameworks and finally start learning Spanish in a clear and structured way, then check the description. I hope this video helps you, and stay humble.